Fire and Emergency Services Instructor, 8th edition. Chapter 8, Testing and Evaluation. So this afternoon we're going to talk about chapter number 8, Testing and Evaluation. Learning objective number 1, discuss the 2 ways to assess a student's success. There are 2 ways. This is the first way. A norm-referenced assessment measures the accomplishment of one student against that of other. This is in the traditional approach to teaching, and we use it for promotional testing and determining the ranking of candidates through recruit academies. We also have Criterion-referenced assessment, which compares the student performance with the criteria in learning objectives. It's a standard on which to base a decision or judgment. A student's grade is based on whether or not they meet the criteria in the learning objectives, and all course activities should be designed to help students reach this goal. Criterion-referenced assessment, still comparing student performance. Test scores are translated to a pass or no pass fail grade. Students who meet the criterion are given the grade of pass. Students who do not meet the criterion are given the grade of no pass or fail. So you have norm-referenced and criterion-referenced. Now you'll find that you've got different environments for both criterion. Your criterion-reference-based assessment you're going to use when you're teaching courses like this one, Fire Instructor, Firefighter 1, Firefighter 2. Your norm-referenced is when you're going to use that in hiring processes and things of that nature to kind of compare the students one against the other. You're going to identify the classification of tests. Instructors should be familiar with test classifications. You have prescriptive tests, you have formative tests, and you have summative tests. You should be familiar with test classifications. Continuing on, administration classification of oral tests, written tests, and performance tests. So let's go back here. We're talking about various ways to test your students and make sure that they've got the information they need to pass the material. You'll administer all of these kinds of tests in the fire service. You'll administer the prescriptive, the formative, and the summative tests as well. So for some things, you'll want to do an oral test. For others, written. And for even others, performance. So we use all 3. Oral tests are commonly used in the classroom when we're verifying that the material is getting out to the student. You use a written test generally to reinforce knowledge and gauge knowledge and figure out where your students are at. And then your performance testing is going to be psychomotor based for the most part, measuring them against the criterion specified in that particular job performance requirement. Let's talk a little about test bias for a few moments. We have an obligation as Level 1 instructors to eliminate testing bias wherever we can. Gender references, ethnic references, cultural references, using regional jargon or dialect, and terminology and vocabulary. So we want to make sure in gender-wise we try to treat things as non-specific as possible. Instead of saying he, she, or male, female, you want to make sure you eliminate any of the gender references from your testing biases. You don't want to treat men a certain way. You don't want to treat women a certain way. Everybody gets graded upon the same standard. As well as that, it goes for ethnic references. It goes for cultural references as well. You should try to maintain to not have these test bias in your questions. Regional jargon or dialects, there is a captain on our fire department who has a very specific term for the pin that's in the door that you knock out to take the hinge out. It doesn't have a really nice name, so we generally try not to refer to that particular pin the way he mentions that pin. Jargon, there was another time where I was on a run with a lieutenant of mine from Brooklyn, and we were talking about some sort of plant. And he's like, well, have you ever cooked this? And we're like, no, what is that? And he explained it to us, and we figured out that it was kind of regional jargon that he was using. And we call it one thing, they call it another, so on and so forth. Kind of like, for example, if you're talking to folks from out of state, it's the great discussion between soda and pop. What is soda? What is pop? I generally use those terms interchangeably, but you'll run into folks that are like, hey, that's soda, or hey, that's pop. Terminology and vocabulary is a big one. You want to make sure that you're using consistent terminology and vocabulary, because that's the way that your students are going to be evaluated on these tests. And they need to know the correct terminology and the correct vocabulary to use. A lot of guys on my department make fun of me because I call things by their scientific name or their medical documentation name. So instead of saying difficulty breathing, my reports generally say dyspnea. If we check for pulses and so on and so forth in our initial assessment, patient's alert and oriented ×4, patient is not apneic and has a carotid pulse. So just an example of terminology that you should use instead of just calling it what you've called it for that for many different years. Test administration, a very important process for the instructor one to be able to take care of. We should consider the physical environment of the classroom for test administration. There are 5 aspects of a training or of a testing environment that will help minimize issues with the physical environment. You need appropriate lighting. You need comfortable seating, quiet surroundings, a regulated temperature, and proactive responses to performance barriers. So we should adhere to some guidelines when we're administering a written test. Before the test, ask the agency to determine whether there are any specific instructions for administering the test. This is something that gets sent to all Indiana instructors who are proctoring exams. They will send you the actual documents, the actual information which you will use to test your students with the statewide testing location or statewide testing site. You want to report to the testing location an appropriate amount of time before testing begins. My recommendation is 1 hour. That gives you time to set up the individual computers, to set up the tests, to make sure you have everything, and make sure you're ready to go. Maintain security of tests at all times. Once that test is sent to you, it is your responsibility to maintain security of it. There have been a couple instances in the past where people have not maintained the security of their exams, and they've ended up on the internet for everyone to see. That is a definite no-no. You want to make sure that your tests, the tests that were issued to you for your class, are being maintained at all times. Rearrange classroom seating when necessary so it is conducive for taking written tests. Generally, by the time we get to the end of a course, I will have enough seats in between, so I will assign seats on the testing day. That way students cannot look at each other's tests and move from there. The other piece that the state does is they send out different versions of the test to you as well. So you may have 4 students with test version 1. You may have 4 more students with test version 2. And basically you can pepper them in however you'd like to make sure you've got everything necessary set up for taking a written test. You want to eliminate all potential distractions. Pagers, cell phones, radios, turn them down or off. Devices off the table, cell phones on silent and put away. Number each page of all tests and answer sheets. That's already done when you're giving a statewide test. They have all that information done. Assign a number to each test and answer sheet, then collect them all at the end of the test. We talked about this earlier. Ensure all cell phones, smartphones, MP3 players, and pagers are turned off and put away. And then you want to make sure that your students do not bring written or electronic notes into the testing room unless it is approved. For example, if you are taking any of the Indiana Instructor tests, you're allowed a copy of IAC 655 for each student. I believe in the past they have also authorized the use of an ERG, of the current year's ERG, for hazmat questions that may or may not show up on those exams. That depends exam to exam, and you'll have that information in the proctor's information given you by the state. You want to watch for signs of academic misconduct. There's a movie that was made in the 80s called Spies Like Us, and the guys that become the two main characters in the movie, it's illustrated of them doing various things back and forth, trying to cheat off each other or copy off one another, and then they end up at the very end, ending up in the director's office, giving a very strict talking to about their academic misconduct. So you want to watch for that. Watch for any signs that anything's amiss. You have to ensure the environment remains quiet and safe for students. So, for example, when we teach this at Brooklyn, I page it out advising people that there's a test at this point in time. Please stay out of the training room. Stay in either the new equipment bay or the old equipment bay. That way we don't interrupt any students taking tests. Have your students place all their backpacks, purses, books, and other items at the front of the room so you can monitor them. If they leave the testing area, make sure they do not take the test with them. You want extra paper, writing implements, pens or pencils, and answer sheets. If possible, have testing aids on hand to assist with difficult students or situations. Ensure that students have followed directions on the answer sheet correctly when they finish the test, and do not allow students to change answers once the answer sheets have been submitted. One of the positives of using Moodle for online distribution is that your tests are already written for you. All you have to do is provide your students with the access to the Moodle site, and they will go in and fill out their own testing as well. That's an example of electronic testing that we have currently. In the past, what we did is the state would send out a certain number of Scantron forms. Indianapolis EMS still uses a Scantron form for all of their internal testing, so they have to make sure that the answer sheets are filled out correctly. That way, when they get ran through the Scantron machine, there are no issues or mistakes with the test or the testing instrument or the answer sheet. After the test, review the test with students to clarify any objectives they may not have understood. Maintain the security of tests and answer sheets, especially when scoring and recording grades. Return test material to the proper authority if another instructor will be scoring and grading them. Identify answer sheets with identical incorrect answers or sequences of answers on multiple test sheets. These could be indications of academic misconduct. Most courses have a specific clause in their planning template that says if you are caught with engaging in academic misconduct, that is grounds for immediate dismissal from the course. Before the test, you want to make sure that the subject matter of the test matches what is being tested. We're not giving a fire instructor 5th edition test to a student who has prepared fire instructor 8th edition. You want to make sure you provide students with adequate practice time during class leading up to the test date. These are for performance tests, by the way. You want to provide rehab facilities such as restrooms or refreshment areas. You want to ensure that tests are not biased through wording, timing, or unattainable criteria. Test administration rules should be included in the instructions. Read them aloud to the students exactly as they're written. Provide students with time limits for each test and clearly state the times for emphasis. Explain the purpose of each test and encourage the students to ask questions if they do not understand something. During the test, you give the performance test to each student in exactly the same manner. You record their scores on the performance checklist as each one takes the test. Following the test, those scores are confidential. Now, even with that said, the students will often go outside and they'll exchange their information as far as what they received on the test. For some, like for example, when we do psychomotor testing at the city, the students are told very non-specifically, you should hear back from us within X amount of days. If you don't hear back from us from X amount of days, then you need to call us and make sure that we have a score for you, and you can ask about your score at that point in time. but until then, all test scores are kept confidential. Let's talk about the differences between scoring and grading tests. Scoring should be objective and based upon established criteria. So this is a breakdown of a break a door lock checklist from what looks like a Firefighter 1 or Firefighter 2 curriculum. This talks about using the K tool, the time totals, whether they've got everything. It takes you step by step in using that particular tool as far as selecting and things like that. So most of the test scoring for the testing that the state does is available through the instructor's guides and the instructor documentation. It is available for most every course out there. Follow guidelines for scoring written tests manually. Score the same question on all tests before proceeding on to the next question on short answer or essay exams. Read through several responses before you score the essay or the short answer test. Add comments to the essay or short answer questions to indicate what is missing or congratulate the student on good work. Shuffle the papers before scoring the next question after scoring one set of questions on all the tests. Do not attempt to score large numbers of tests at one time. And indicate, using lines or arrows, which comments refer to which parts or portions of the answer. Inform students about the meaning of scoring marks used in essay or short answer question tests. Identify a maximum of 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses of an answer when scoring an essay or short answer question. Use the provided rubric to identify the key points that should be addressed in each essay or short answer response. Take into consideration distance learning factors. Classes in a distant learning format takes much more preparation than the same classes in a face-to-face setting. Online courses do not have a time delay to return graded tests or assignments. You have to work diligently to provide effective and timely feedback to the students. The lack of direct contact between students and instructors makes scoring written work an even more critical task. And when faxing tests, make sure the document you send is in black ink on white paper. Use the following guidelines for scoring oral tests. Depends upon the purpose of the test and the type of question asked. The instructor should present the questions as they have been provided on the test and then follow the scoring guidelines provided. A rubric for an oral test is often very similar to a performance test. Instructors should follow guidelines for scoring performance tests. They can be subjective, follow the score sheet guidelines. Tasks that directly relate to safety cannot be skipped or performed improperly. Use multiple instructors to observe each student during the test. We do this with the employee screening at Indianapolis EMS. So generally what I do is I'm the lead evaluator, and I will sit and watch what the student does, and I will score the student as we go through. But the patient is also an EMT, and he knows what we're looking for those particular criteria. So he will often assist me when I go back to fill out the document. He will often assist me and make sure that I scored the student correctly and fairly according to the rubric. They must be given a clearly stated set of objectives in the scoring criteria. They should provide immediate feedback while observing the project. Know how to grade tests. They're very simple after scoring. The total number of points that the student earned is divided by the total number of points possible to arrive at a percentage. This mainly applies to written tests, but may be applicable to performance testing. Instructors should be aware of grading bias, assigning grades based not upon student scores, but upon what group they belong to. It is easy to prove on multiple choice tests and is considered unethical conduct. Subjective tests are more challenging for evaluators to grade. Follow provided rubrics and grading checklists. Do not succumb to the pressure to grade certain students differently than others. Objective 6. Explain the importance of accurate grade reporting. Scores must be recorded and reported in accordance with local procedure or agency policy. They are recorded in the individual student records and used as feedback. Follow the provided scoring guidelines to determine a final grade for the course. Records are private and confidential. They should be retained in individual student files. And reporting test results to the training division is necessary. Objective 7. Identify guidelines to reduce academic misconduct. So let's talk about how to reduce that. Follow security measures when writing, duplicating, and storing test materials. Never rely solely on questions published in the textbook or the study guide. Revise test questions regularly. Use secure data storage systems to prevent unauthorized access to tests or grades. Require students to use assigned passwords in order to limit access to computer-administered tests. Number all test sheets, booklets, and answer sheets and take inventory after each use. Use 2 or more versions of a single exam to prevent students from copying from each other during the test. Talked about this earlier. Store all old test sheets in a secured location. And destroy outdated testing materials. Benefits of instructor feedback on student outcomes. Evaluation feedback is important because it gives instructors the opportunity to use student errors as the basis for reinforcing information addressed on the test. Meet individually with students to discuss the test and review incorrect answers with the entire class. In summary, evaluation and testing allow both instructors and the training division to determine both how well students are learning and how well instructors are teaching. They must know when and how to use different types of formal education and testing. Critical skills for the Level 1 instructor to master include properly administering, scoring, and securing tests, and determining and reporting grades. The instructor must be able to use the test results to give students helpful, accurate, and timely feedback. And that is the end of chapter number 8.